Okay, as far as the victims that we know of, and as anyone's involved in child abuse, especially institutional child abuse scenarios, it's not often that they come forward as soon as these ones did, or very rare that all of them would come out all at once. I think there's a lot more to come out, and I think if any serious investigation, say from an organization like Grace or some professional organization who's dealt with child abuse, if they were to get in there and talk to these kids, they would find out far more than what we know. Because just some of the talks we've known from some of the young people who are not living in the control of the Sankey group, there was so much going on there of which we're not aware, and there's a lot that's not being talked about. Now, I think over the years and over time, it will all come out. But I think if a serious investigation was done, there would be a lot of light shed on the actual happenings, the inner workings of the operation there. Um, uh, to be fair to Tom, we haven't gotten reports that he was involved in abuse with the young people there at Sankey. From the reports we've received, from Hazel and others, we'll talk about her, others, that it was the greatest thing for the kids when Tom would come and visit. It was like any time he visited, like Christmas and Santa Claus. Everything went well. The monkey business with Toto and Jake didn't happen. And then when Tom was gone, that's when it was run kind of like well, you don't want to really call it a prison camp, but it was a type of thing that Toto's in complete control and you do what he says or else. Now, what got us involved was the testimony of two girls who decided to talk about being forcibly kissed by Toto. And they first told a teacher that was working with them, and they'd also started to talk a bit to John and Alice Shepard. Alice Shepard was the principal of the school, and we actually knew her she's a member of my church in our small town of Rizal Laguna, and John Shepard is a retired Australian from Department of Defense in Australia, and he fell in love with Alice, who was a widow, and they got married. And so, having come over on Tom's work teams, John and Alice were naturally interested in helping out on Tom's project. Alice was qualified and took over the job as principal of the school. Some of the young people had started talking to John and Alice before, but then they went to Australia for a furlough. So during this furlough, they started talking to one of their teachers. It was particularly two girls, Hazel and Lisa, who had a very similar experience. He was friends with my daughter, who had just moved. 6 months before these reports, Tom Randall had performed the wedding of my daughter in California, in Corona, California. And they'd been living in Los Angeles. And then they came to work with us. Miriam and EJ came to work with us in the Philippines. 6 months before Tom had done the wedding, we just had such a good relationship, I thought, at the time. And then 6 months later, we get these reports. Of course, I'm thinking, with our great relationship, and I get these reports, Tom's going to believe it and we'll work together, like I said before. But it didn't turn out that way. And when Miriam told me that these girls were saying that Toto had kissed them, I said, okay, I have to have something in writing. I can't just call Tom and tell him it's hearsay. I need to have something in writing. Well, the girls, of course, very fearful. They said that everything they do was watched and reported on, and there was even spies within their group who would report on each other if they were doing anything suspicious. Tom and Toto were requiring, the kids were now, we're talking 18 to 20 years of age, getting up to, there were some that were a little bit, mostly around that age. They were required to sign a statement that they would not say anything bad against the Sankey home and administration, or they would not be allowed to stay. So they virtually had to sneak out these letters to the teacher. The teacher brought them to Miriam. Miriam brought them to me. I immediately scanned them and emailed them to Tom. And when Tom had been away at first, when he got back and was able to look at the letters, he called me, basically telling me that he doesn't think it's a big deal, that the one girl, Hazel, seems to be emotionally disturbed. He actually told me that he'd gotten dozens of letters from her. Later on, when we talked to Hazel, she said, no, how could I write to him? Everything I was doing was watched. I could not talk to him. And so from Hazel's testimony, she says she never sent a letter to Tom. Tom on the phone told me, I've gotten a dozen letters from her and she tells stories and blah, blah, blah. And so he says, just basically wait, I'll take care of it when I get there 5 weeks later. So we got these letters, and when you read the letters, you just feel something is really wrong there and something needs to be done. Well, I was going to wait for Tom, and then the next 5 weeks I was going to wait. But then we got a report the next week from the girls, because they were getting information out. It's amazing how once people know there's someone who wants to help, how they're able to get some information to you even though they're being watched. And even though there's spies among themselves who are reporting everything, they were able to get information to us that a man was being allowed in the girls' dorm at nighttime. Now, that was a big concern. And my company, because Tom and I have been partners in ministry for so many years, as a service to the children's home, the security agency that I paid for my center was providing the security for Sankey, and I paid it as a service to the center. So paying the security guards, and now knowing that if someone's being allowed in the girls' dorm, there's a problem with security. So I talked to the security agency owner about the problem, and so we decided to go and replace all the security guards. Well, when we did that, Toto basically hit the roof, and I had to call Tom because Toto called the military and police and asked them to come to chase us off. I'm there with the security agency owner changing her own security guards, and yet Toto calls the police and military. I said, Toto, we got to call Tom. No, he calls the military and police friends he has. So then I call Tom. I say, Tom, there's a situation here. I'm trying to get the security guards replaced. And so he talks to Toto, he talks to me, and Tom says, Joe, get out of there. You can get hurt. I said, Tom, don't you understand that there's a danger to these kids and we need to I said, what is wrong with replacing the guards? And he couldn't really have an answer. As it turned out, I left the security agency owner there to talk with Toto and with Tom on the phone, and they finally agreed to replace the guards. And having left, they replaced them. When we had brought the guards in, Miriam and the teacher went to the girls' dorm with a lady guard. They'd never had a lady guard, only men guards. Went with a lady guard up to the second floor where the girls' dorm was. And when the girls saw the lady security guard, they said, what's she doing here? To Miriam. Miriam said, we brought her here to protect you. And they ran. These are teenage girls. They ran and hugged the security guard. Wow. And then if we needed any more confirmation that we were onto something, oh my goodness, that was it. We knew it was a bad situation. The things going on there, the depth of it has not yet come out. But we knew it was bad when teenage girls welcome a security guard into their dorm. Things are not good. The sad story is 3 days later, Tom and Toto changed back to the old guards. The old guards ran to another agency under Toto's direction. Toto hired the new agency to replace the agency I was paying. Before they could even replace them, half of the guards that my agency had put in there had abandoned their posts and wrote letters of apology to the owner saying, we felt threatened. We felt our lives were in danger by the threats, and we left our posts. Please forgive us.
Oh my.
So basically that was my first clue. Tom is really not going to cooperate with solving this problem. And then when he did arrive 5 weeks later and met with and Miriam, the whole message was basically, you know what, you need to just let this drop. Basically, he felt she was being offered a bribe to be quiet, which she did not receive, of course. Yeah, and so then when they're leaving, because Tom insisted on meeting with privately, my daughter, who had come along with, joined at the end, and Tom moved to, as they were closing up, Tom moved to give my daughter a hug, and she went away. You got to understand that 6 months earlier he had done the wedding, and now he goes to approach her. He goes, and he got furious. And give me a hug. He goes, he says, Miriam, you have to stay out of this because he says, I forget the exact wording. He says, but it's something like, if you don't stay out of this, you and your whole family will be deported from the Philippines. Do you want that to happen? And Tom himself,
like he had the authority to
well, Tom had a lot of connections, as obvious because of the way the case went. He obviously had a lot of powerful connections. He'd been many years, just like me, many years in the Philippines. We both have connections. My connections are more in the greater church area. His connections were more celebrity and political connections, military and all that stuff. And so anyway, it was basically a threat to Miriam at the time. Well, that's when that happened. That's when I turned over everything I had to the church pastoral intervention committee, but not my daughters. That's when they went to find another way because they knew this was bad.